story because this Ridgway Glover was a man of Quaker faith, and he actually was born in New Jersey in 1831. Ridgway Glover was a man of Quaker faith. He grew up in a Quaker family. Anybody know what the philosophy of Quakers are?
Farmers.
Well, kind of.
Oh,
But they're very conservative in nature, very deeply religious and conservative. And he was a man of Quaker faith, grew up in a Quaker family, and he was born in New Jersey in 1831. So you're thinking to yourself, how does this guy get from New Jersey all the way out to Fort Phil Kearny near Sheridan, Wyoming, right? Well, I'm going to tell you how he does that. What he did is he developed a tremendous interest in this new technology called photography. Yeah. So he develops an interest in this new and exciting technology that's come up called photography. And he studied photography, and he wanted to go west to do photographs of the western frontier and the people who had inhabited the frontier. You heard these great stories of the West and the frontier and the people who lived there, and he got this interest in photography, and he studied how to do it, and he decided, you know what, I'd like to go west and take these pictures of the people that live out there, and what does the West look like? Well, he didn't have any money to do it. So what did he do? No, he went to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. and said, hey, anybody know what the Smithsonian Institute has? Museums and all kinds of artifacts. They're interested in history and of this country. So he goes to the Smithsonian Institution. He says, listen, I'm a pretty good photographer. If you'll pay my way out west, I'll take these photographs and I'll give you first chance at having them and displaying them in your museums. And they thought that was a pretty good idea because they weren't going to get any photographs out west, were they? That'd be pretty cool for people back east to see what was going on back west and the type of people that moved into this hostile, savage land. So they said fine. So they agreed to sponsor him. So he went to the western frontier. Now he didn't end up right away at Fort Phil Kearny. He actually went to Fort Laramie first. And then remember Virginia City, the mining town in Montana? He went there, and then he arrived at Fort Phil Kearny. So he went to Fort Laramie and took some pictures there, made them available to the Smithsonian Institution, right? Would have. Then he went to Virginia City, Montana, and saw what was going on in the mining camps there. And he probably made a mistake by coming to Fort Phil Kearny because it was a hostile environment, okay? But he did. He went to Fort Phil Kearny and wanted to take some pictures there. Now, he was bold because he always went outside the fort to take pictures. And even witnessed Indian ambushes on other people on a pretty consistent basis and took pictures of those. Okay? Well, finally, on September 16th of 1866, his disregard for his own safety caught up with him. Okay? So on September 16th of 1866, Ridgway Glover's disrespect or disregard for his own safety caught up with him because his dead body was discovered just a short distance from the fort. Okay? So he went out many times taking pictures, witnessed Indian ambushes, took a gamble, went out many, many times. And on September 16th of 1866, his disregard for his own safety finally caught up with him when they found his dead body just a short distance from the fort. Wasn't a pretty sight. His once flowing long hair was totally removed. He lay face down and his back was split in half by an Indian tomahawk. That's the treatment he got. Now, I'm guessing, and historians predict, that Ridgway Glover did not experience a quick death. More than likely, he was tortured prior to dying. Okay? So they probably scalped him alive, and then probably whacked him in the back with that tomahawk and left him to die. I mean, it was a miserable, miserable death, is what historians predict. Now, why did they do that?
He was trespassing.
Well, but there was a certain spiritual thing. Now, it didn't have anything to do with reincarnation. Go
Also,
ahead.
because like in the afterlife, their enemies like would go.
Well, we talked about that. They didn't really see him as much of an enemy. I mean, he didn't carry anything.
They wanted to see him cool.
No.
It was the photographs.
What about the photographs, Mrs. Montoya?
I'm thinking they were afraid of them and they thought something would.
They were. They saw photography in those photographs of things going, and they thought that was, quote, bad medicine. And so they probably just tortured that poor son of a gun to death because they saw photography as evil, man. Oh my God. Wouldn't that surprise you if you were that behind the times technology-wise and you saw these pictures of yourself on a, so they saw that as really bad medicine, and that's probably the reason why he got his brutal treatment. Ollie had the right idea, just that he didn't show really any threat to him. Meeting a photographer in the afterlife was not going to be any big deal, but what he had, those photographs, they considered really bad medicine. Well, he pays a heavy price for his passion of photography and the foolish disregard for his own safety. All those photos that he had taken at Fort Laramie and over there in Virginia City and at Fort Phil Kearny were never found. I'm sure the Indians took them. They were never found. And historians state it remains a sad fact that Ridgway Glover's talents as a photographer was not able to create a pictorial history of the time in the American West. It would have been great to have those photos at the Smithsonian and said, God, this is the way it was at Fort Phil Kearny. We're getting pictures of Fort Phil Kearny? No, I mean, really none of, some of Virginia, but at that time, we don't have any good pictures. That'd have been great. They had the right idea, but the poor guy got a little risky. Poor Ridgway. Okay, last thing we'll talk about around Fort Phil Kearny was the Battle of Pinot Creek. The Battle of Pinot Creek. On December 6th of 1866, a battle was fought near Fort Phil Kearny between military forces and hostile Indians. And that battle that was fought on December 6, 1866, was fought on Pinot Creek, which was a creek in the vicinity of the fort. Remember, it was on the Big Piney and Little Piney, but there was Pinot Creek that was in the distance. And what happened to start this fight is Indians attacked those civilian woodcutters, and the men were forced to flee back to the fort. This is one of the worst attacks, and the men couldn't stay there. They couldn't defend themselves, so they started to make a flee back or retreat back to the fort. Well, soldiers from Fort Phil Kearny were sent to the aid of the woodcutters and were to support them while they were retreating. And it resulted in a battle in which 2 soldiers were killed and 5 others were wounded. So this Battle of Pinot Creek was when the Army soldiers went to the relief of woodcutters, and as the woodcutters were retreating back to the fort, the infantry engaged the hostile Indians, and 2 soldiers were killed and 5 others were wounded. Now, this is important to understand for tomorrow. The reason the soldiers were killed is they traveled over a ridge called Lodge Trail Ridge, which is just probably a quarter mile or so, maybe half mile from the fort. And it's a ridge that goes down into a big valley. And when they went over that ridge, they made themselves pretty vulnerable. And Colonel Carrington believed they were incredibly lucky that the entire regiment that, just barely went over Lodge Trail Ridge were lucky they didn't all get massacred, because you're very vulnerable because you're in a bowl, kind of, you know what I mean? The ridges surround. And so the soldiers had traveled over a ridge called Lodge Trail Ridge, and once the battle ended, Carrington realized that the soldiers were very, very lucky to have gotten out of there. Yeah, basically it's rolling hills and ravines, okay? And a perfect place for an Indian ambush. So basically Carrington made a rule that you will never go over Lodge Trail Ridge if you're ever sent out in pursuit of Indians. because if you go over that ridge, it is not gonna work for you. 15 days later, his commanding officer, which we'll talk about tomorrow, disobeyed orders and went over Lodge Trail Ridge. It was the worst Army massacre to that point prior to the Battle of the Little Bighorn. So they went over the ridge and got themselves in trouble. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we talk about the Fetterman fight, or you could call it a massacre, depending on who. It's a massacre if who wins. Indians, and it's a fight if who wins. Soldiers. So we'll see tomorrow whether we're gonna call it a fight or a massacre.